May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord. And this morning, as I preach this sermon, we welcome those who will hear this and see this sermon online. In 2007, my career in the parks industry of 27 years ended through redundancy. It was a life-changing situation and one of the greatest challenges I had faced. It was a huge test of my faith as I lived through the hurt and the worry. I can only speak for myself, as we all experience life from our own perspective. So for me, being made redundant affected my self-esteem, and the realities of what had happened were difficult to face, and the question of what next became consuming. I was fortunate as I quickly moved into new but mundane jobs. We survived financially, but as time dragged on with a feeling of worthlessness, I was left questioning where God was amidst my trials. Now I look back and I can see God's plan for my life as God prepared me for ministry. But with God's sense of humour, God took almost 10 years of preparation time. At the time, I felt desperate. Now this morning's psalm is so relevant because I cried for help, and I can say thank you to God because God healed me. Today, we heard Jesus cleansed a leper. The man with the disease came to Jesus and directly begged him as he knelt in front of Jesus. His begging acknowledges who Jesus was and identifies Jesus as someone who could cleanse him. The leprosy-affected man didn't put demands on Jesus, but he simply invited him to cleanse him of the disease. He said, "If you choose, you can make me clean." I wonder if I had put too much pressure on God rather than asking God if God chooses to help me. I can imagine that this man was desperate. He lived with leprosy, a terrible contagious disease which society in those days enforced people affected with it to be sent away. The carriers of the disease had no contact with family or friends. They couldn't be in towns or cities, and even if the wind blew past them towards others, they had to keep a distance of at least 50 metres. As if this disease wasn't bad enough, the seclusion that resulted through being sent away from family, friends and society was likely to lead to loneliness and depression. The leper in today's gospel reading was desperate. His actions of coming to Jesus and being in close proximity to him showed that he was prepared to risk everything. If the authorities saw this, the man could have been put to death. This man clearly knew who Jesus was. He believed that Jesus could, if he chose, make him clean. Jesus had the power over life or death for the man with leprosy. We understand that Jesus came to give life, and to encourage us to live it to the fullest. It is easy to see why Jesus chose to give life to this man. Mark tells us that immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. Today, Jesus reached out and touched this leper whose society treated as untouchable. In my challenges in life, I too can say that Jesus has reached out and touched me through the phases of life when I called out for help. What about you? Do you experience God amidst your challenges? What about the good times? Do you recognise God choosing to give you the fullness of life that we understand is God's plan for us. Today's story tells of a person who was in desperate need and how Jesus chose to heal him. Jesus took a risk. Jesus touched the man, and the result was the man was healed. But it also showed Jesus' attitude to the laws of the time, as nobody should ever touch anyone with leprosy. Jesus did, and I suggest that this action boldly placed love and compassion over ritual and regulation. When the healing was complete, Jesus sent the man to register himself with the priest, a process that would enable him to move back into society as a well person. This would allow him to be with his family and friends, and life would return to a new normal. But there is a twist to this story. While Jesus enabled the leper to return to society, the leper's actions had the opposite effect for Jesus. Despite Jesus' command, the leper could not contain himself and proclaimed far and wide what Jesus had done for him. The results were both positive and negative. On the one hand, more and more people heard about Jesus. On the other, the number of people coming to him prevented Jesus performing the ministry he was called to. And so we learn that Jesus acted by going away from this town and every other town into the country. Jesus' ministry is the main theme in Mark's Gospel. Mark's writings tell us of Jesus' ministry from his baptism to his resurrection, with about 2/3 of the Gospel focusing on his ministry in Galilee. Mark portrays Jesus as the bringer of good news for the things that affect many of us in our daily lives, and how we should act when faced with them. We learn of the challenges of the sick and the healing they receive. We hear of hope through Jesus' love for us, and we are invited to experience a little of what God's kingdom is all about. This week, we move into the season of Lent, a period of 40 days during which Christians remember the events leading up to Easter and the death of Jesus Christ, and then his resurrection. It is a season that we are invited to reflect on our relationship with God. We can ask who we are to God and who God is to us. But deeper still, we get to ponder how our lives reflect the examples Christ gives us. May we find a little time each day to prayerfully embrace this season, to be with God and to respond to God's call on our lives as we embrace this season, learning of the love God has for each one of us. Amen.